Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of the unknown. In the shadowy realm of crime and mystery, a hidden world of unsolved serial killers lurks beneath the surface. Join us as we embark on a journey into the darkest recesses of the human psyche, where the enigmatic and malevolent remain at large. This is the Unresolved Iceberg, a chilling exploration of the most elusive, enigmatic, and baffling serial killers in history. They haunt our nightmares, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and unspeakable horror. In this series, we'll dive deep into the abyss, uncovering the disturbing stories and hidden secrets of these elusive murderers, whose identities remain shrouded in darkness. Subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell to stay on the edge of your seat as we uncover the mysteries that still haunt us. The Unresolved Iceberg is waiting. Are you ready to take the plunge? Now, before we begin, a couple notes. The first is that I tried to find the original post to credit the creator, but all I could find was deleted posts on Reddit. And second is that this will probably be a multi-part video, as this iceberg is very large in size. But anyway, back to the video. So, what exactly is an iceberg story? Essentially, an iceberg story is a type of video that delves deep into a topic, starting with surface-level facts and gradually revealing more complex and hidden layers, much like the layers of an iceberg, with most of it hidden beneath the surface. The concept draws its inspiration from the metaphor of an iceberg. When we look at an iceberg, we only see the tip of it above the water, while a massive portion remains hidden underwater. Similarly, in these videos, the content creator presents a topic where the tip of the iceberg represents common knowledge, while the hidden depths are the lesser known or obscure facts about the subject. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is the pseudonym of an unidentified serial killer who operated in Northern California in the late 1960s. The case has been described as the most famous unsolved murder case in American history. It became a fixture of popular culture and has inspired numerous amateur detectives to attempt to solve it. The Zodiac murdered 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969, operating in rural, urban, and suburban settings. He targeted young couples and a lone male cab driver. His known attacks took place in Benicia, Vallejo, unincorporated Napa County, and the city of San Francisco. 2 of his wounded victims survived. The Zodiac claimed to have murdered 37 victims. He has been linked to several other cold cases, some in Southern California or outside the state. The Zodiac coined this name in a series of taunting letters and cards that he mailed to regional newspapers, in which he threatened killing sprees and bombings if they were not printed. Some of the letters included cryptograms, in which the killer claimed that he was collecting his victims as slaves for the afterlife. Of the 4 ciphers he produced, 2 remain unsolved, and 1 was cracked only in 2020. While many theories regarding the identity of the killer have been suggested, the only suspect authorities ever publicly named was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted offender who died in 1992. Although the Zodiac ceased written communications around 1974, the unusual nature of the case led to international interest that has been sustained throughout the years. The San Francisco Police Department marked the case inactive in April 2004, but reopened it at some point prior to March 2007. The case also remains open in the city of Vallejo, as well as in Napa and Solano counties. The California Department of Justice has maintained an open case file on the Zodiac murders since 1969. Axeman of New Orleans. The Axeman of New Orleans was an unidentified American serial killer active in New Orleans, Louisiana, and surrounding communities, including Gretna, from May 1918 to October 1919. Press reports during the height of public panic about the killings mentioned similar murders as early as 1911, but recent researchers have called these reports into question. The Axeman was never identified, and the murders remain unsolved. As the killer's epithet implies, the victims usually were attacked with an axe, which often belonged to the victims themselves. In most cases, a panel on a back door of a home was removed by a chisel, which along with the panel was left on the floor near the door. The intruder then attacked one or more of the residents with either an axe or straight razor. The crimes were not motivated by robbery, and the perpetrator never removed items from his victims' homes. The majority of the Axeman's victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, leading many to believe that the crimes were ethnically motivated. Many media outlets sensationalized this aspect of the crimes, even suggesting mafia involvement despite lack of evidence. Some crime analysts have suggested that the killings were related to intercourse, and that the murderer was perhaps a sadist specifically seeking female victims. Criminologists Colin and Damon Wilson hypothesized that the Axeman killed male victims only when they obstructed his attempts to murder women, supported by cases in which the woman of the household was murdered but not the man. A less plausible theory is that the
killer committed the murders in an attempt to promote jazz music, suggested by a letter attributed to the killer in which he stated that he would spare the lives of those who played jazz in their homes.
The Texarkana Moonlight Murders. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders, a term coined by the contemporary press, was a series of 4 unsolved serial murders and related violent crimes committed in and around the Texarkana region of Arkansas and Texas. In the late winter and spring of 1946, they were attributed to an alleged unidentified serial killer known as the Phantom of Texarkana, or simply the Phantom Killer or Phantom Slayer. This hypothetical perpetrator is credited with attacking 8 people, of whom 5 died, in a 10-week period. The attacks occurred at night on weekends between February 22nd and May 3rd, targeting male-female pairs. The first 3 attacks were at lovers' lanes or quiet stretches of road on the Texas side. The 4th attack occurred at an isolated farmhouse in Arkansas. The murders were reported nationally and internationally by several publications and caused a state of panic in Texarkana throughout the summer. Residents armed themselves and, at dusk, locked themselves indoors while police patrolled streets and neighborhoods. Stores sold out of guns, ammunition, locks, and many other protective devices. Some youths attempted to bait and ambush the killer. Investigations were conducted at the city, county, state, and federal level. In the course of investigations, there have been shifting opinions by officials over whether the 1st and 4th attacks were committed by the same perpetrator. The prime suspect in the case was Yul Swinney, a career petty criminal who was linked to the murders primarily by statements from his wife plus additional circumstantial evidence. After Swinney's wife refused to testify against him, prosecutors decided against pursuing murder charges. Swinney was convicted on other charges and sentenced to a long term as a habitual car thief and forger. 2 of the lead investigators believed him to be guilty of the murders. The book The Phantom Killer, Unlocking the Mystery of the Texarkana Serial Murders, concludes that Swinney is the culprit. The events inspired many works, including the 1976 film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. This film is the basis for much of the subsequent myth and folklore around the murders. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer, active in and around the impoverished Whitechapel district of London, England, in 1888. In both criminal case files and the contemporaneous journalistic accounts, the killer was also called the Whitechapel Murderer. Attacks attributed to Jack the Ripper typically involved women working as prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of the East End of London. Their throats were cut prior to abdominal mutilations. The removal of internal organs from at least 3 of the victims led to speculation that their killer had some anatomical or surgical knowledge. Rumors that the murders were connected intensified in September and October 1888, and numerous letters were received by media outlets and Scotland Yard from individuals purporting to be the murderer. The large number of attacks against women in the East End during this time adds uncertainty to how many victims were murdered by the same individual. 11 separate murders, stretching from April 1888 to February 1891, were included in a Metropolitan Police investigation and were known collectively in the police docket as the Whitechapel murders. Opinions vary as to whether these murders should be linked to the same culprit, but 5 of the 11 Whitechapel murders, known as the Canonical 5, are widely believed to be the work of the Ripper. Most experts point to deep slash wounds to the throat, followed by extensive abdominal and the removal of internal organs, and progressive facial mutilations as the distinctive features of the Ripper's modus operandi. The first 2 cases in the Whitechapel murders file, those of Emma Elizabeth Smith and Martha Tabram, are not included in the Canonical 5. The Canonical 5 Ripper victims are Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. The vast majority of the City of London police files relating to their investigation into the Whitechapel murders were destroyed in the Blitz. The surviving Metropolitan Police files allow a detailed view of investigative procedures in the Victorian era. A large team of policemen conducted house-to-house inquiries throughout Whitechapel. Forensic material was collected and examined. Suspects were identified, traced, and either examined more closely or eliminated from the inquiry. Modern police work follows the same pattern. More than 2,000 people were interviewed, upwards of 300 people were investigated, and 80 people were detained. Following the murders of Stride and Eddowes, the Commissioner of the City Police, Sir James Fraser, offered a reward of £500 for the arrest of the Ripper. The concentration of the killings around weekends and public holidays, and within a short distance of each other, has indicated to many that the Ripper was in regular employment and lived locally. Others have opined that the killer was an educated upper-class man, possibly a doctor or an aristocrat, who ventured into Whitechapel from a more well-to-do area. Such theories draw on cultural perceptions, such as fear of the medical profession, a mistrust of modern science, or the exploitation of the poor by the rich. The term ripperology was coined to describe the study and analysis of the Ripper case in an effort to determine his identity, and the murders have inspired numerous works of fiction. Suspects proposed years after the murders include virtually anyone remotely connected to the case by contemporaneous documents, as well as many famous names who were never considered in the police investigation, including Prince Albert Victor, artist Walter Sickert, and author Lewis Carroll. Everyone alive at the time is now long dead, and modern authors are free to accuse anyone without any need for any supporting historical evidence. Suspects named in contemporaneous police documents include 3 in Sir Melville Macnaghten's 1894 memorandum, but the evidence against each of these individuals is, at best, circumstantial. There are many varied theories about the actual identity and profession of Jack the Ripper, but authorities are not agreed upon any of them, and the number of named suspects reaches over 100. Despite continued interest in the case, the Ripper's identity remains unknown. St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre was the murder of 7 members and associates of Chicago's North Side Gang that occurred on Valentine's Day 1929. The men were gathered at a Lincoln Park, Chicago garage. They were lined up against a wall and shot by 4 unknown assailants, 2 dressed as police officers. The murders resulted from the competition for control of organized crime in the city during Prohibition between the largely Irish North Siders, headed by George Bugs Moran, and their largely Italian Chicago outfit rivals led by Al Capone. The perpetrators have never been conclusively identified, but former members of the Egan's Rats gang working for Capone are suspected of involvement. Others have said that members of the Chicago Police Department who allegedly wanted revenge for the killing of a police officer's son played a part. In the morning on Valentine's Day, Thursday, February 14, 1929, 7 men were murdered at the garage at 2122 North Clark Street, in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago's North Side. They were shot by 4 men using weapons that included 2 Thompson submachine guns. 2 of the shooters were wearing police uniforms, while the others wore suits, ties, overcoats, and hats. Witnesses saw the men in police uniforms leading the other men at gunpoint out of the garage after the shooting. The victims included 5 members of George Bugs Moran's North Side Gang. Moran's second-in-command and brother-in-law Albert Koshelik, alias James Clark, was killed along with Adam Heyer, the gang's bookkeeper and business manager, Albert Weinshank, who managed several cleaning and dyeing operations for Moran, and gang enforcers Frank Gusenberg and Peter Gusenberg. 2 associates were also shot, Reinhard H. Schwimmer, a former optician turned gambler and gang associate, and John May, an occasional mechanic for the Moran gang. Chicago police officers arrived at the scene to find that victim Frank Gusenberg was still alive. Despite having sustained 14 bullet wounds, he was taken to the hospital, where doctors stabilized him for a short time, and police tried to question him. When the police asked him who did it, he reportedly replied, "I won't talk. For God's sake, get me to a hospital." He died 3 hours later. The massacre was an attempt to eliminate Bugs Moran, head of the North Side Gang. Al Capone, who was at his Florida home at the time, was widely assumed to have been responsible for ordering the massacre. The Valentine's Day Massacre set off a public outcry, which posed a problem for all bosses of the National Crime Syndicate. Within days, Capone received a summons to testify before a Chicago grand jury on charges of federal prohibition violations, but he said he was too unwell to attend. Many mobsters have been named as part of the Valentine's Day hit team. 2 prime suspects are Cosa Nostra hitmen John Scalise and Albert Anselmi. In the days after the massacre, Scalise was heard to brag, "I am the most powerful man in Chicago." Union Siciliana President Joseph Guinta had recently elevated him to the position of the Union's vice president. Nevertheless, Scalise, Anselmi, and Guinta were found dead on a lonely road near Hammond, Indiana on May 8, 1929. Gangland lore has it that Capone had discovered that the pair were planning to betray him. Legend states that Capone produced a baseball bat at the climax of a dinner party thrown in their honor and beat the trio to death. In 1995, Chicago criminologist Arthur Bilek, who had researched the massacre through FBI files and court transcripts for 30 years, named the participants in the massacre to have been Capone henchman machine gun Jack McGurn, who assembled the murder team that included lookouts Byron Bolton, Jimmy Moran, no relation to Bugs, and Jimmy McCrisson. Their job was to watch the garage and alert Tony Accardo and the other triggermen, Fred Burke, Gus Winkler, Freddie Getz, and Robert Carey. When Bugs Moran appeared at the site, another team member, Claude Screwy Maddox, procured the killer's transportation, a car resembling those used by police. With the stage set, Capone and McGurn established alibis. Capone going to Florida. McGurn checked into a hotel with his wife, Louise Rolfe. His claims were backed up by the former FBI agent William Romer, who had heard claims of Tony Accardo also being involved as one of the shooters on several occasions by Murray the Camel Humphreys through a microphone planted in the Chicago tailor shop in 1959. The garage at 2122 North Clark Street. was demolished in 1967, and the site is now a parking lot for a nursing home. The bricks of the north wall against which the victims were shot were purchased by a Canadian businessman. For many years they were displayed in various crime-related novelty displays. Many of them were later sold individually, and the remainder are now owned by the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. Villisca Axe Murders. The Villisca Axe murders occurred between the evening of June 9, 1912, to the early morning of June 10, 1912, in the town of Villisca in Iowa, United States. The 6 members of the Moore family and 2 guests were found bludgeoned in the Moore residence. All 8 victims, including 6 children, had severe head wounds from an axe. The Moore family consisted of parents Josiah B., aged 43, Sarah Montgomery, 39, and their 4 children, Herman Montgomery, 11, Mary Catherine, 10, Arthur Boyd, 7, and Paul Vernon, 5, an affluent family. The Moores were well known and well liked in their community. On June 9, 1912, Mary Catherine Moore invited Ina May, 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, 12, to spend the night at the Moore residence. That evening, the visiting girls in the Moore family attended the Presbyterian church where they participated in the Children's Day program, which Sarah had coordinated. After the program ended at 9:30 p.m., the Moores and the Stillinger sisters walked to the Moores' house, arriving between 9:45 the next day, June 10th. Mary Peckham, the Moore's neighbor, became concerned after she noticed that the family had not come out to do their morning chores. Peckham knocked on the Moore's door. When nobody answered, she tried to open the door and discovered that it was locked. Peckham let the Moore's chickens out and called Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Like Peckham, Moore received no response when he knocked on the door and shouted. Ross unlocked the front door with his copy of the house key. While Peckham stood on the porch, Ross went into the parlor and opened the guest bedroom door, where he found Ina and Lena Stillinger's bodies on the bed. Moore immediately told Peckham to call Henry Horton, Villisca's primary peace officer, who arrived shortly thereafter. Horton's search of the house revealed that the entire Moore family and the 2 Stillinger girls had been bludgeoned to death. The murder weapon, an axe belonging to Josiah, was found in the guest room where the Stillinger sisters were found. The killer began in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Josiah received more blows from the axe than any other victim. His face had been cut to such an extent that his eyes were missing. The ceiling in his room also had a gouge mark from when the murderer lifted the axe to hit him. The killer, or killers, used the blade of the axe on Sarah, while using the blunt end on the rest of the victims. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul were next bludgeoned in the head, in the same manner as their parents. Afterwards, the murderer returned to the master bedroom to inflict more blows on the elder Moores, knocking over a shoe that had filled with blood, before moving downstairs to the guest bedroom and killing Ina and Lena. Seemingly afterwards, a 4-pound slab of bacon was taken out of the icebox and laid next to the axe. Investigators also found untouched food and bloody water during the search. After the search, people were let in to see if they could have committed the crime, completely contaminating the weapon. Over time, many possible suspects emerged, including Reverend George Kelly, Frank F. Jones, William Mansfield, Loving Mitchell, Paul Muller, and Henry Lee Moore. No relation. Kelly was tried twice for the murder. The first trial ended in a hung jury, while the second ended in an acquittal. Other suspects in the investigation were also exonerated. Smiley Face Murder Theory. The Smiley Face Murder Theory, also known as the Smiley Face Murders, Smiley Face Killings, and Smiley Face Gang, is a theory advanced by retired New York City detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, as well as Dr. Lee Gilbertson, a criminal justice professor and gang expert at St. Cloud State University. It alleges that 45 young men found dead in bodies of water across several Midwestern American states from the late 1990s to the 2010s did not accidentally drown, as concluded by law enforcement agencies, but were victims of a serial killer or killers. The term smiley face became connected to the alleged murders when it was made public, but the police had discovered graffiti depicting a smiley face near locations where they think the killer dumped the bodies in at least a dozen of the cases. Gannon wrote a textbook case study on the subject titled Case Studies in Drowning Forensics. The response of law enforcement investigators and other experts has been largely skeptical. As recently as 2017, Gannon and Duarte were examining evidence going back to the late 1990s that they believe connects the deaths of 45 college-age males whose dead bodies were found in water in 11 states, often after leaving parties or bars where they'd been drinking. The men, according to the former detectives, often fit a profile of being popular, athletic, and successful students, and most were white. Gannon and Duarte have theorized that the young men were all murdered, either by an individual or by an organized group of killers. The term smiley face became connected to the alleged murders when it was made public that Gannon and Duarte had discovered graffiti depicting a smiley face near locations where they think the killer had dumped the bodies in at least a dozen of the cases. Other police forces that have investigated the deaths dispute the conclusion that the cases are linked. Police departments that are involved do not currently view the deaths associated with smiley faces present at the scenes as serial killer activity. The La Crosse, Wisconsin Police Department, which oversaw 8 of the investigations, concluded that the deaths were accidental drownings of inebriated men, and stated that no smiley face symbols were found in connection with any of the cases. Criminal profiler Pat Brown calls the serial killer theory ludicrous, arguing that the evidence does not fit what is known about serial killers. Brown also believes that the smiley face images found in some of the cases are likely nothing more than coincidences based upon guesses as to where the bodies entered the water, with smiley face graffiti only found after a wide area search. She told Minneapolis-based newspaper City Pages, "It's not an unusual symbol. If you look in any area 5 mile square, I bet you could find a smiley face." The FBI issued the following statement. The FBI has reviewed the information about the victims provided by 2 retired police detectives who have dubbed these incidents the smiley face murders, and interviewed an individual who provided information to the detectives. To date, we have not developed any evidence to support links between these tragic deaths or any evidence substantiating the theory that these deaths are the work of a serial killer or killers. The vast majority of these instances appear to be alcohol-related drownings. The FBI will continue to work with the local police in the affected areas to provide support as requested. Setagaya family murder. This story comes from Japan, so if I mispronounce anything, I apologize in advance. The Setagaya family murder refers to the unsolved murders of the Miyazawa family in the Kamisoshigaya neighborhood of Setagaya, Tokyo, Japan. On the night of December 30th to 31st, 2000, Mikio Miyazawa, his wife Yasuko, their daughter Nina and son Rei were murdered during a home invasion by an unknown assailant, who then remained in the family's house for several hours before disappearing. Japanese police launched a massive investigation that uncovered the killer's DNA and many specific clues about their identity, but the perpetrator has never been identified. The media frenzy and long investigation of the murders became a cause to abolish the statute of limitations for crimes that could merit the death penalty in Japan, which was removed in 2010. On December 31st, 2000, the bodies of 44-year-old Mikio Miyazawa, his 41-year-old wife Yasuko, and their children, 8-year-old Nina and 6-year-old Rei, were discovered by Yasuko's mother, Haruko, at their house in the Kamisoshigaya neighborhood of Setagaya in the western suburbs of Tokyo. Mikio, Yasuko, and Nina had been stabbed to death while Rei had been strangled. Investigation of the crime scene by the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department concluded that the family had been murdered on December 30th to 31st at around 11 p.m. to 12:05 a.m. midnight Japan Standard Time, after which the killer stayed in the house for several hours. The killer entered through the open window of the second-floor bathroom at the rear of the house, located immediately adjacent to Soshigaya Park, and gained access by climbing up a tree and then removing the window screen. The killer used his bare hands to strangle Rei, sleeping in his room on the second floor, killing him through asphyxiation. Mikio rushed up the first-floor stairs after he detected the disturbance in Rei's room, biting and injuring the killer until being stabbed in the head with a sashimi knife. A police report claimed that part of the sashimi knife's blade broke off inside Mikio's head, and the killer then attacked Yasuko and Nina with the broken knife until using a santoku knife from the house. The killer remained inside the house for 2 to 10 hours, using the family computer, consuming 4 bottles of barley tea, melon, and 4 ice creams from the refrigerator, using their toilet without flushing, treating his injuries using first aid kits and other sanitary products, and taking a nap on a sofa on the second-floor living room. Surprisingly, the killer also left 10 items behind on the family's sofa: knife, scarf, hip bag, sweater, jacket, hat, gloves, shoes, and 2 handkerchiefs. Police have been able to deduce several very specific clues to the perpetrator's identity, but have been unable to produce or apprehend a suspect. They determined that the clothes and sashimi knife left behind by the killer had been purchased in Kanagawa Prefecture. Investigators found the killer's DNA and fingerprints throughout the house, but none matched their databases, indicating that they do not have a criminal record. Physically, the killer is believed to be around 170 centimeters tall and of thin build. The police estimate the killer was born between 1965 and 1985, 15 to 35 years old at the time of the incident. Due to the physicality required for entering the Miyazawa house and committing the murders, the Miyazawa's wounds indicate that the killer is likely to be right-handed. The killer's blood was gained during an analysis of the murder scene that revealed traces of type of blood which would not have belonged to the Miyazawa family. A DNA analysis of the blood determined the killer is male and possibly mixed race, with maternal DNA indicating a mother of European descent, possibly from a South European country near the Mediterranean or Adriatic Sea, and paternal DNA indicating a father of East Asian descent. The investigation into the murders is among the largest in Japanese history, involving over 246,044 investigators who have collected over 12,545 pieces of evidence. All evidence related to the case remains in custody. As of December 2021, there is still a 20 million yen reward for information leading to the arrest of the killer. And with that, we can mark off the first layer of this iceberg. Now, this video took so much longer than I was ready for. So with that being said, we are going to end the video here and start the next layer in the next video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. And if you did, hit that like button and subscribe with the notification button on so that you can know when the next video drops. And always remember, stay curious and keep exploring, even in the hidden corners of the happiest places on earth.